Welcome to this show of paintings of Portland architecture by mid-20th century artist Betty Chilstrom. What follows is a brief story about her life and work. This self-portrait of Betty was done in the 1960s, the era in which she began painting old Portland homes and buildings. She was fascinated by them and by the character they brought to our neighborhoods. Betty was also very aware of the urban landscape as a whole. From the 60s onward, she captured city scenes that have vanished due to urban renewal, like the Charles Hill building, which was once at the heart of the Albina neighborhood. She saw how fast the city was changing from the late 50s onward and was ready at the minute to hop in her car, or, as you can see in this picture, to hop on her car in order to capture buildings of interest that were slated for demolition. She often made notes on her drawings to indicate colors, architectural detail, and demolition dates. As her daughter, I grew up with these images. Some of my favorite paintings are the industrial scenes, from bridges to trains, the old gasworks on St. Helens Road, but I'm getting ahead of the story here. Betty's life began in the great American West. She was a descendant of Oregon pioneers who settled in Washington and Idaho and Oregon. She first came to Portland in 1942 to finish high school. Here's a little glimpse of Portland as it was then. After graduation, Betty joined her sister Jean working at Kaiser Shipyards on Swan Island, working as a shipfitter's apprentice. She always carried a little sketch pad in her pocket, 3 by 5 inches, and during breaks, she sketched portraits of her co-workers. When I came across these drawings, I wondered how she learned to draw, and then I remembered her telling me that she'd scrounged through garbage cans to find paper to draw on as a kid. Born with natural talent and a strong desire to self-express, she must have been drawing all along. In 1946, Betty married Lee Chilstrom. Early family years were very busy. By 1955, they had 4 children. I don't know how she made time to draw in between changing diapers, feeding and clothing and playing with the babies, cleaning the house, taking the stroller to market, doing the laundry in an old-fashioned wringer washer, but she did. You can see the evolution of her skill in this series of drawings of David. She drew as a daily practice, taking every opportunity to grab her sketchpad and draw her kids in 2-minute, 3-minute, 5-minute sketches. Family and friends often dropped by, giving Betty a chance to draw Mary's new baby or a favorite niece or a little boy from across the street. She began showing her work at state and county fairs, was invited to be a guest artist at holiday events, and she and Lee hosted an annual booth at the Rose Festival's Artquake, where she did hundreds of quick sketch portraits of children and adults. But houses held a special fascination for Betty, especially little white houses. She was homeless throughout her childhood, but in every town they stopped, there must have been a little white house that looked welcoming, where she could imagine herself at home, safe and loved. That may be why houses are so prominent in her collection. At first, she sketched in the Buckman neighborhood she lived in, experimenting with watercolor and pen, but she couldn't get the depth of color that she wanted with color washes. That's when my father built a small easel that fit on her steering wheel. With a compact paint box and 8 by 10 canvases, she was free to roam the city and paint in oils. And here are some of those little white houses she painted from her car. It was natural that Betty started showing her portraits of the city in the annual Rose Festival booth. People were fascinated and often asked her if she'd painted this house or that before it was torn down, and that led to the idea of a graveyard of houses where she showcased demolished homes with a view towards historic preservation. With that in mind, she kept painting. As you can see in this beautiful painting of the American Hotel on the upper right, she painted iconic locations like the Temple Beth Israel, St. Patrick's Church, and the Interstate Firehouse Cultural Center, but also iconic neighborhood scenes, hippies sitting on the stoop, the Outside In Clinic, and an old apartment building under the Morrison Bridge. But her choice of subjects sometimes surprised me until I did a little research. That painting of Rocky Butte, for example, I learned it had been built from rocks quarried nearby in a deposit from the Missoula floods, and when it was demolished, the stones were used to rebuild sections of the historic Columbia River Highway, which still exists today. She immersed herself in the city and the city's life, and became an everyday historian, capturing an afternoon at the city dump, a building being demolished, or the aftermath of a storm. Here's another part of the story. Working for the railroad, my dad always knew about city events that affected rail travel and would often come home and call out, "Get your sketch bag, Betty, there's a fire at the river," or the bag factory, or that old building on Grand is being demolished today. As a fourth-generation Portlander, he was always supportive of her work in archiving the changing city. And the city was changing, with huge urban renewal projects underway. The South Auditorium Renewal Project, in 1962, displaced over 1,500 residents, many of whom were elderly Jewish and Italian immigrants. Along with them, 289 businesses were removed as the city cleared a huge swath of riverside property. The East Side Freeway project was underway. Albina had been declared an area of advanced blight, with the city implementing a massive urban renewal project that displaced over half the area's predominantly Black population, despite progress being made by the citizen-led Albina Neighborhood Improvement Project. With foresight, the copper dome of the Hill building was salvaged, and many years later, it was installed as the roof of a gazebo in nearby Dawson Park. Entire blocks were demolished, taking with them the Melville Hotel, the Oriental Theater, the Blue Mouse, to make way for parking lots. Several citizen-led preservation projects were, for a time, successful, like the move of the Captain John Brown House, a landmark in Northwest Portland. Betty was there, sketching the move every step of the way, and her drawings illustrated the story of the move in a booklet that was used to raise funds to convert the house into a senior center. Unfortunately, by 1973, lack of funding led to the demolition of this historic Portland landmark. Fortunately, not all restoration efforts ended that way. You might recognize the Morris Marks house on the left of the screen. It was built in 1880 and languished in disrepair for decades on Southwest 12th. Just before it was slated, once again, for demolition, it was saved by moving it to a new location and has now been restored. And then there's the brilliant reuse of the Portland Armory, converted to serve the public once again as a theater through combined efforts of the owners, developers, the City of Portland, and Portland Center Stage. And today, it is a national model as a green building surpassing LEED standards. Betty's industrial landscapes, as I mentioned before, are my favorites. They're so beautiful in their honesty and simplicity. As a train dispatcher, my father knew all the crews and was able to make it easy for Mom to paint from normally inaccessible locations. She often drove down St. Helens Road or through the Northwest Industrial District, always finding something of interest to paint. On the top left is the old gasworks with the St. John's Bridge in the background. My parents traveled as much as they could. They both loved the adventure of going somewhere and not quite knowing where they would end up. On the right, you'll see this gorgeous painting of the Bonneville Dam. Every time I look at it, I am amazed that she made something so industrial into a beautiful image. On the left is the old wooden Shannaco Jail in Wasco County. Betty kept painting through the 1970s and 80s. By the 1990s, arthritis in her hands made controlling a paintbrush difficult. However, she was being remembered for her work. At the age of 75, Betty was invited to have a one-woman show at the Oregon Historical Society. It was 1999, and the focus of her life as an artist was being recognized for its beauty and content and meaningfulness. One last time, at the age of 87, she was asked to share her work here at the Architectural Heritage Center in honor of National Preservation Month. She gave a little talk, basked in the attention and warmth of appreciation. Betty followed her path through life with incredible persistence of will. Through her love affair with the city of Portland, she left us with a beautiful legacy to share. After living in her own home for 70 years, Betty died in 2014 at the age of 90. She was spunky and engaged in the world, even on her very last day. Bravo, Betty. The Chilstrom family want to thank the Architectural Heritage Center for hosting this show of Betty's work.